In this short little video, we're going to talk about incremental and absolute confirmation. I'll be up front, I'm not super crazy about how your book established this distinction, so I've modified how we're talking about these words just a little bit, but not so much so that I think it'll cause any trouble in answering questions on homework or quizzes or anything like that. But just something to be attentive to if you're like, hey, that's just a little bit different. You're right, it is. Confirmation in most tests of hypotheses is incremental. This means that the probability of a hypothesis after such a test is greater than it was prior to the test, but that the probability is not as high as it could be. So take the following situation. Imagine that you have never seen a mammal before, but you're told what sort of features mammals have so that you know how to identify them. Now let's say you go out into the world and start finding mammals, like a chipmunk or a rhino, and you check to see whether or not these mammals bear live young. Each time you find an animal that fits the description of a mammal, and then discover that it bears live young, you're going to further confirm your hypothesis. So by the time you've looked at a whole bunch of different mammals, and in each case they bear live young, you've incrementally confirmed your hypothesis by a lot. When you found out, hey, the chipmunk, that they bear live young, that provided some incremental confirmation. Then when you did the same thing with the rhino, the panda, the dolphin, each time the amount of confirmation went up by an increment. But you didn't have absolute confirmation. And let's say after you keep going you encounter this weirdo, the platypus, who also fits the description of a mammal, but doesn't give birth to live young. Instead lays eggs. Now what you found is that the view that all mammals bear live young has in fact been completely disconfirmed. And we're going to talk more about disconfirmation in the next video. But just note for now, despite all the little increments of confirmation that you got from the chipmunk, the rhino, the panda, the dolphin, etc., these were overturned by one act of disconfirmation. You never had absolute confirmation for the view that all mammals bear live young. Let's look at another example. Pandas can currently be found in China. In this instance, if you find yourself one panda in China currently, you've pretty much absolutely confirmed that this is true. It's not the type of thing that, unless it turns out you were hallucinating or someone had set up, a fake panda to trick you, that you could be wrong about pandas are currently to be found in China if you find a panda in China. Such a confirmation where the evidence supports the hypothesis to the highest degree is an absolute confirmation. In general, we can say that the more unlikely it is for a prediction to be true, unless the hypothesis is true, the better the truth of that prediction confirms the hypothesis. Okay, so this is important. Let's think about this in the case of the examples we had. In our second example, where we're trying to confirm that pandas can be found currently in China, that was our hypothesis. The prediction was we can find a panda in China. And when we found it, that prediction, that's really, really unlikely to be true if the hypothesis isn't true. You're just not going to find a panda currently in China if it's not the case that there are pandas currently in China. That's why the confirmation of the second thing was absolute. But then think back to our first instance. All mammals bear live young. Now, it's more likely, perhaps slightly, to be true that a chipmunk will bear live young if the hypothesis is true, but not drastically so. That's why the confirmation is relatively small for any individual mammal that we find, that it bears live young. Of course, if you take a whole bunch of mammals and predict that they all will bear live young, like the chipmunk and the rhino and the panda and the dolphin, when it turns out that they all bear live young, that's significantly stronger confirmation. It's a much bigger incremental change. But of course it's still not absolute, because we're able to keep searching out other mammals and see whether or not they also bear live young. This is also why very vague predictions of astrology don't count as strong confirmation for the legitimacy of astrology. Predictions like, "many people miscalculate when judging your abilities," and "a significant change could result in a journey," are not unlikely to be the case regardless of the status of astrology. Thus, even if these predictions turn out to be true, it's a very small incremental justification, incremental confirmation of the legitimacy of astrology. And it's so small, which is why most of us don't think of astrology as any kind of legitimate science. Alright, that's all for this video. We'll talk about disconfirmation in the next one.